many new faces, equally so many familiar faces for the first debate of Michaelmas 2018. We've got 10 more to go, so hopefully you won't run out of enthusiasm as the term goes on. Tonight is obviously a topical and traditional motion. The motion before the House is this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. We have 3 speakers on side proposition. We also have 3 speakers on the opposition. Just to remind you all of the rules, they should be on your order paper, but just as a summary, our speakers will be speaking for 10 minutes each. Between every pair of speakers, there will be an opportunity for you to speak in a floor speech, and if you speak in said floor speech, you'll get a chance to come through for the post-dinner drinks, so it's worth doing. Incentive there. And we also have the chance for you to stand up and interrupt our speakers. So if any of our speakers says something which you passionately disagree with, you have the chance to stand up and say on that point, and it is the right of the speaker to decline, but I have instructed them to hopefully accept at least one. But again, it's their prerogative to choose or to decline. So without further ado, we'll kick off with our first speaker on the proposition. Sir Ed Davey was the Energy Secretary in the coalition government from 2012 to 2015, and the Liberal Democrat MP for Kingston and Surbiton from 1997 to 2015. I believe he was re-elected in 2017 for the same seat. So without further ado, Sir Ed Davey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it's unusual for me to start off by identifying the strongest argument of my opposing side, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to take it head on. And that's because this statement, this motion, would be, if passed, the most dramatic understatement ever passed by the Cambridge Union in its history. This government is a disgrace. The motion shouldn't read, this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government, but it should say Her Majesty's government is a national embarrassment and an embarrassment to the Conservative tradition. And I hope, however, you'll still vote for it. And you will take those words and that feeling, that emotion as read. But I want to make 3 substantive arguments tonight. The first, that this government is trashing Britain's international reputation and influence. The second, that it has no domestic agenda to deal with the problems that beset our country. And third, Brexit. Not in terms of whether Brexit is a good idea. It's clearly the most stupid idea ever put forward. But in the way it is handling its own key policy. And I want to explain to you why I think its incompetence on even its own agenda suggests that we should have no confidence in it. First of all, international influence. Well, Brexit is bad enough. We are saying to our neighbours, our 27 closest, nearest allies in Europe, that we don't want to be part of their club. But that itself is pretty bad in the capitals of Beijing and Washington, because we'll have less influence because not at the European table. But Brexit aside, they're still undermining our influence. When Prime Minister Theresa May took office, she called in a decision that I've been involved in about Chinese investment in a nuclear power plant. So far, so reasonable. No reason why she should not call that in. Except Number 10 told the world that the British Prime Minister was doing that because she didn't trust the Chinese. Now, because of Brexit, we need to have some influence around the world, but telling a superpower, and certainly the world's future biggest superpower, that you don't trust them is not a really good way of winning influence. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Access potential nuclear technology.
There is indeed an argument for that, and we looked at it at the National Security Council. But if there's an argument, you don't say it in public. You don't insult the Chinese, but their hold on diplomacy is such that they did. That's how bad they are. And then, of course, she appointed Boris Johnson to be the Foreign Secretary. And here we had a series of the buffoon gaffes, which are extraordinary. He started off by calling the former president of France, François Hollande, like an officer of in a prisoner war camp of World War II. He then went on in a trip to Myanmar to read a colonial-era poem from a temple. And then when he was talking about British investment in Libya, he talked about the fact that British companies weren't investing in Libya because of the dead bodies. I mean, what a crass foreign secretary. I'm not even going on to the many other failures of foreign secretary, and there are many of them. But of course, you could argue, well, he's no longer the foreign secretary, it's Jeremy Hunt. And to be fair to Jeremy, he's an improvement. It'd be difficult to be worse. However, the foreign secretary has managed to have a massive gaffe just this week, when he basically said the EU was like the Soviet Union. He's tried to sort of spin this, but I'm afraid our European friends have heard it. And Donald Tusk, who's the president of the European Commission, has voiced his fact that he remembers the Soviet Union. He was in Poland during the Soviet Union. And some of our closest allies, who might help us during the Brexit negotiations, are in Central and Eastern Europe. And our Foreign Secretary, in the midst of the Brexit negotiations, has gone and insulted them. This is shocking. I mean, I know we're used to Trump tweets and crass in politics, but in a former age, when we had common sense and analysis and evidence, a Foreign Secretary saying this would have been forced to resign. I do not believe the world has confidence in Her Majesty's government, and I don't think we should either for the way they're conducting international relations. And let me bring it to domestic politics. This government does not have an agenda. If you look at rising crime, rising violent crime, they're cutting police numbers at the same time. If you look at protecting our vulnerable people in our society, this April, the Conservative government cut support to widows and widowers, to families with children where a mother has died or a father has died. Have we really got that low, where we're taking money from children, from families where a father has died or as a mother has died? That is a disgrace. I speak as someone who lost my father when I was 4, and my family needed that widow's benefit. Unfortunately, my mother died when I was 15. We needed the state to look after us, and that lot have taken that away. I have no confidence in them. And a third issue, which I think is relevant, is the railways. Have you travelled on the railways recently? I mean, hello? I mean, they're making the case for Corbyn nationalisation because they can't even run the railways. And I don't believe in renationalisation, by the way, but they're making a case for it because they can't even run the railways. And if you look at their domestic agenda, what are they getting Parliament to do? Most of the time, we just have a general debate with no vote. But some of the big issues of the day, air transport operators licensing bill, laser misuse brackets, vehicles close brackets bill, non-domestic rating close open brackets, nursery grounds close brackets bill. These are all worthy issues to debate in Parliament. But they're hardly tackling the big issues of the day. Now, I believe, as a former Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, that climate change is a big issue of the day. When I was in government, we trebled Britain's renewable power capacity. We trebled it. And I bequeathed to them a whole pipeline of investment in renewable power. What have they done? They've squandered it. And in green technology more broadly, critical to our futures. Investors around the world are fleeing Britain. We've gone plummeted down the global league of where it's good to invest in renewable energy. And, you know, why do people stay in a country to invest in renewable energy? What do they need? They need stability of policy. They need a clear policy direction. They need consistency. They need clarity. This government are not providing that. And it's not just in the energy infrastructure, the energy industry, they're not doing that. They're not doing it in financial services. They're not doing it in advanced manufacturing. And so I think they are undermining our future. And I think this is hugely serious. When capitalists don't believe in a Conservative government in Britain, we've got problems. They don't have confidence. Capitalists don't have confidence in that lot anymore, and that should worry you. Let me bring you to Brexit. Now, my question on Brexit is not the issue. The colleagues opposite will tell you that there was a referendum and fine. They have a mandate to negotiate Brexit. I don't dispute that. I think by the time they've eventually got a deal, whatever it is, that should be put to the people. The people should vote on the deal. But that's not my argument tonight. My argument is very simple, that the party of Brexit, the government of Brexit, can't deliver Brexit. It's astonishing. Now, we know Brexit means Brexit, in what is, have to say, the most inane comment to come from any British Prime Minister ever. We still, over 2 years after the referendum, have 57 Heinz varieties of Brexit. These three gentlemen probably don't agree what Brexit should be, and they're the hard Brexiteers. And it is quite extraordinary. I've never known such an important issue before our country, before our parliament, and I've never known a government so divided, both on its backbenchers and in the cabinet itself. Oh, yeah, tell me how they're united. I'd love to hear.
Brexit government. As a Conservative government, it represents the entire country. In the Conservative Party, there are people who are ardent Remainers, there are people who are ardent Brexiteers. So we don't have trust in this government. We rather don't have trust in this nation. And I'm not terribly surprised as a Liberal Democrat tells us he doesn't have trust in this nation. That's why he wants to become a colony of Europe.
Right. I tell you what, my honourable friend, I have trust in the people of Britain. I have huge trust in the people of Britain. I think they are being completely misled by this current government. And my honourable friend is going to talk more about Brexit, but let me end my remarks on this issue. A government whose apparently its sole purpose is to deliver a Brexit deal has made it costly, has taken so long, has made it so complicated that if you're confused about it, I don't blame you, because they're confused about it too. And I think this is a huge betrayal, including a betrayal of the people who voted leave in the referendum. So please, my friends, the world doesn't have confidence in them. Capitalists don't have confidence in them. I don't think a lot of the leave voters even have confidence in them. We should not have confidence in them.
Thank you very much, Sir Ed. We pass on now to our second Knight of the Realm on the opposition. Sir Desmond Swayne has represented New Forest West since 1997. He was David Cameron's Parliamentary Private Secretary and then served as Minister of State at the Department for International Development. Sir Desmond, the floor is yours.
Mr. President and comrades, on the contrary, I present to you in evidence a compendium of wisdom for the modern age, an answer to all the dilemmas and conundrums set out usefully in the conversations between Winnie the Pooh and his friend Piglet. And if I may quote from a critical passage for this night's proceedings. No is a very big word. No is a very big word. Now, I can understand entirely while there might be members in the House who have little confidence in Her Majesty's government. I've been there. I'm an Uber Cameroon, a former regime loyalist. Twice during my sojourn as David Cameron's Parliamentary Private Secretary did I try to persuade him to sack Theresa May. He wouldn't take my advice. Crikey, how modern contemporary history might have been different, and indeed my own ministerial career not quite so short-lived had he taken my advice. So I empathize with those who have little confidence. But no is a very big word. A very big word. A children's book full of wisdom. No is a very big word. If you retain a smidgen of confidence in this government, then the motion fails. Now, all our judgments in politics, and indeed in most other spheres of life, are made on the basis of a comparison. Comparison between the confidence you might have in Her Majesty's government is going to be, to some extent, consequent upon your confidence in the alternative that is on offer. And if I may say to my honourable friend, with whom I was a partner in the coalition government, his is not an alternative that is on offer. The only plausible alternative to the current administration is a Corbynite-led Labour Party leading the government of this country. Now, as I say, all judgment is by comparison. There is plenty, when we contemplate that alternative, contemplate and fear that might terrify us as a prospect of what the future might hold. Not least the fact that it has been wargaming the run on the pound and the flight of capital that will accompany the Shadow Chancellor's determination to overthrow the capitalist system. We are already well past the 1 trillion spending commitment put to the people at the last general election. And this week we had even better, the extraordinary hypothesis that we should all expect to be paid for 5 days' work when only having done 4. There is plenty to fear from a Labour government, but I want to concentrate on only one small aspect of the alternative tonight. When I was at university in the second half of the 1970s, I was the leader of the Conservative Student Organisation in the University of St Andrews. And I counted amongst my good friends the leader of the Scottish Nationalist Student Organisation, who at that time was one Alex Salmond, who not only was a Scottish nationalist, he was, certainly in my estimate, also an out-and-out Marxist. But we were generous and kind to one another. And so it was with the leader of the Labour movement, and indeed the leader of the Liberal movement. Thank goodness, comrade, there were no such thing as Liberal Democrats then, in those halcyon days. But nevertheless, we would drink together. We would end up at the same parties, and we would often date the same women and men, although that was not so quite straightforward as it is these days. But nevertheless, actually, I'm glad to hear it. Actually, that has been the case throughout my political career. In 7 general elections, I have never once had a crossword with another party's candidate. Indeed, when I fought the borough constituency of Pontypridd, I came across the Labour canvassing team out one night with their Member of Parliament, their candidate as it was then, Brynmore John. And what did? We did the obvious thing by joining together and going for a drink. Now, in the House of Commons, however, we behave abominably to one another, but for only half an hour a week. In that bear pit of Prime Minister's questions, when you want to see your gladiatorial champion beat the hell out of the other guy, we behave disgracefully. But beyond that half hour, we are perfectly civil to one another. There are friendships across the House, and there are plenty of examples of achievements by common endeavour across the parties. In short, we are civilized. I believe that that civilization is now in jeopardy as a consequence of a contagion primarily contracted by an activist wing of the Labour Party, which is the principal pillar of support for Jeremy Corbyn. It is a deeply unpleasant phenomenon, intolerant, hostile to freedom of speech and freedom of thought. You will see it in the contorted visages of rage as you run the gauntlet of going through that phalanx of protesters as you attempt to enter the Conservative Party conference through that phalanx, as I say, of Corbynite supporters. Actually, it was the case last year and the year before and the year before that. Where were they this year? They were gone. And the reality is that their true venom was never reserved for us Tory bastards. It was always for their own Labour Party. It was a Labour member of Parliament this year who had to have a police escort to get into the Labour Party conference. And the purges have already begun. Last week, Christopher Leslie's vote of no confidence from his constituency association. But Gavin Shuker, who was my ministerial shadow when I was a minister, the most Christian and kindest of men, for him to be purged by his local association, let that be a measure of what is now raging within the Labour Party. A point of information?
Surely we should be hearing about one thing that this current government is doing well and not the multiple things that the opposition is doing badly.
As I've said, judgment is by comparison of alternatives. And the night is young. The night is young. And there is plenty of time for my honourable friends to opine on that. The problem with class warriors is that they believe in class war. And the problem with class war is that it is war. And they are genuinely a ghastly phenomenon. The notion that these people will call the shots in the party of government should be enough to replenish any deficit of confidence that you may have in the government. You would be sucked in to their vortex of perpetual agitation. It would be a ghastly thing to behold. What is the alternative? A prime minister who said that the worst thing she ever did, aside from sacking me, the worst thing that she ever did was to walk through a field of corn, if you can believe that. But remember, comrades, no is a very big word.
Thank you very much, Sir Desmond, for that arresting and entertaining speech. We pass on now to a round of floor speeches. So if you want to speak in proposition of the motion, I can ask you to put up your hand and wait for a microphone to come to you. Don't be shy. I'm going to go to the gentleman down there. Can you say your name and your college, please, first, when the microphone gets to you for the record?
Is it working? I don't know. Joshua Dack, Robinson College. As we all are here today, it's very hard for us to actually talk in this debate without talking about Brexit. I'm sure this is the only thing the government over the last 2 years has actually spoken about. As the right honourable gentleman over there said, I personally haven't heard much in the way of domestic policy over the last 2 years that's actually been implemented. On that note, the right honourable gentleman over there says, no is a very strong word. Yes, it is, but the Conservative Party has absolutely no Irish policy. So Theresa May at the moment is moving slowly towards a no-deal Brexit. And what does this mean for the country, and what does this mean for the union as a whole? Well, it threatens the Good Friday Agreement, which is something that for many years if any of you have ever lived in Belfast, you will understand the violence that took place in Northern Ireland. Well, if we have a no-deal Brexit and the backstop is implemented, Theresa May's government is currently in coalition with the DUP. And we risk re-agitating violence in Northern Ireland. We risk threatening the union as a whole. And a no-deal Brexit would be disastrous for this country. It would be disastrous for the union. That's basically my point.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Joshua. Does anyone have a point in opposition of the motion? Does anyone want to speak on behalf of Her Majesty's government? In the front row.
I find it rather interesting that the current government is criticized so heavily for Brexit, again, in comparison, as has been established by the second speaker. Because currently, if we look at actually the opinions on Brexit in the current Labour government, we have Jeremy Corbyn, who has voted systematically against every pro-European law or every pro-European treaty in his entire existence in Parliament, and probably views it as some sort of capitalist expedition in order to crush the bourgeoisie in individual countries, as I guess Marxist theory would suppose that a free trade agreement between countries would be. And then we have current incredible disagreements between various people deciding whether or not there would be a vote over what type of deal there would be, whether that vote would include one that happened to be on whether or not we'd stay in. I wonder if this really sounds any better than what we currently have. It doesn't seem like there would be any more coherence, any more certainty under the alternative government. So again, by comparison, why exactly are we suggesting that this government deserves any less confidence than the alternative?
And finally, does anyone want to speak in abstention of the motion? Oh, God, this is popular. We're going to go to the very top up there. So just wait for the microphone to get round. Name and college, please, first, if that's okay.
Hi, Ellie Brain, Fitzwilliam College. I just want to disagree really with the fact that the question is this House disagrees. This House thinks that the government is ridiculous, because I think it honestly should be, does anyone on this planet think that this government has done anything successful at all? Especially since, after a quick Wikipedia scan, I've seen that the people in front of me agree with the death penalty, conscription, have said that the NHS belongs in Stalinist Russia. I could go on for quite a while. Also, just a message to the Cambridge Union, can you get some more non-male and state-educated speakers, please? Thank you.
If it is just a response to that, we did invite all of the cabinet to this, including every female member of the cabinet. They all said no, so I don't know what that says about the motion in question. But we are trying as hard as we can to make sure we do have representation. Yeah, we will try, and we're always listening to what our members put forward. We're going to come back round to another round of floor speeches later on in the debate. But we're going to move now back to the main debate. So the first speaker, the second speaker on side proposition is Bryant Mp. Bryant is a prominent Labour Party MP who served in Ed Miliband's shadow cabinet and was Gordon Brown's last minister for Europe. Formerly a vicar, he has represented the Rhondda constituency since 2001. Chris, the floor is yours.
Dear, dear Desmond. Or rather, oh dear, Desmond. I mean, honestly, the only argument he had was that he only has a smidgen of confidence in the government, and that's enough for us to plough on forward 5 more years. What do we want? A smidgen. I mean, there is an honest fact here, and the lady who just spoke, incidentally, you're absolutely right. There shouldn't be so many. All the invited guests tonight to speak are men, and that is wrong. It is true that we are slightly diverse in that I'm slightly homosexual. Well, no, all right, completely homosexual. I was just sort of breaking it. I was breaking it to you gently. And in fact, I'm a practicing homosexual, and one day I'll be quite good at it, or at least so my husband hopes, anyway. But it's wrong. Politics is too overloaded with men, and actually 52% of the population are women, and we should have more women in politics, and it should start here in the Cambridge Union as well. But the key point I want to make tonight is that it does matter, first of all, whether the Cambridge Union has confidence in Her Majesty's government, and for that matter, whether anybody in Parliament has confidence in Her Majesty's government, because, Mr. President, as you just said, no member of the government was prepared to come here to debate the issue of whether they have confidence in the government, which would suggest that the government hasn't got confidence in Her Majesty's government. And certainly, I know none of those 3 do. Put up your hand if you've not sent in your letter of no confidence in Theresa May. Oh, you've not done it yet. Have you signed it? Not sent it in? Are you ever going to send one in? Oh, so you haven't even got the courage of your own convictions, I notice. Now, look, I'll start with what is the main policy of Her Majesty's government. It's virtually the only policy it has, which is about Brexit. I'm a Remainer. I was a Remainer. I remain a Remainer, and I will remain a Remainer until my dying day, unless I have to become a rejoiner, because I suspect that may be what's going to happen. No, there's a bit of me that believes that it just isn't going to happen yet. Well, politics is good to have dreams, I think, and that is one of my dreams. I have a dream of a country that is internationalist, genuinely internationalist, that shares its sovereignty so as to achieve a safer and a better and a more prosperous Europe. Yes, I do have that dream, and I feel that this has become a nightmare. But the truth is that neither the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, nor the Home Secretary, just to take those 4 senior posts in government, believe in the single central policy of this government, namely pursuing Brexit. Each of them, in their own way, has brought forward papers showing if Brexit proceeds, whether it's a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit or whatever kind of Brexit it is, each of them has presented papers to the British public showing that there will be significant damage in their area of policy to the United Kingdom, and incidentally, to the unity of the United Kingdom as well. So, of course, we can't have confidence in a government that doesn't believe in its own central policy. And if you ask Connor, if you ask Peter, they'll tell you later on, they won't say it here in the debating chamber, but they'll say it in the bar afterwards. They'll say, the problem with the Prime Minister is she doesn't believe in the policy that she's advocating. The trouble with the Chancellor of the Exchequer is he doesn't believe in the policy that he's advocating. You wanted to intervene, of course.
The Prime Minister doesn't believe in Brexit.
So there you are. Basically, would you like to take my seat over here? Join. They've also completely mishandled the whole process. Who on earth would choose to start a time-limited process, the Article 50 process towards Brexit, when you have no idea what you actually want to achieve out of it, what your negotiating stance is going to be? It was ludicrous. I'm proud that I voted against it. That's despite the fact that my constituency, incidentally, voted in favour of leaving the European Union. I voted against triggering Article 50 partly because I'm a Remainer, but also because I just didn't believe that the government had the faintest idea what it wanted to do with it. And incidentally, hasn't Theresa May gone 50 rounds with the English language? It's not just that Brexit means Brexit, which of course doesn't mean anything at all. It's that other sentence, we will achieve the best possible deal for Britain. Well, of course you will. By definition, you'll have achieved the best possible, because otherwise it would have been the impossible deal that you weren't able to achieve. I mean, I don't think she thinks logically. She just throws words at you and then has a tussle with them, a bit like her dancing, and at the end of it, I mean, she believes she's a dancing queen. She didn't check with the man who wrote that song, incidentally, who said that Brexit will be a disaster for Britain. We've also got a series of utterly incompetent ministers. Ed has already referred to some of them, but we've had serial people falling on their swords. It was, Amber Rudd, who I like, incidentally, and she's good in some things, but a complete mishandling of the Windrush saga, which should be a national disgrace. And incidentally, it should be seen as a national disgrace. It is a scandal, and frankly, it goes directly to the policy that Theresa May herself personally started, which was to have a hostile environment for immigrants into this country. I'm sorry, my dream is of a country where we actually accept the fact that nearly everybody in this room, in the end, is descended from immigrants. That is what we are as a nation. I think my ministerial career was even shorter than Desmond's. It was about 5 minutes, and I didn't like the way you said the last Labour Europe minister. There will be another Labour Europe minister, I'm sure. But one of my concerns is that what we are doing through Brexit is that we are making it far more difficult for us to project our influence across the rest of the world. Theresa May repeatedly comes back from European Council meetings saying, it's great, I have secured strong sanctions against Russia. Well, she's not going to be able to do that next year, is she? Because she simply won't be in the room. But I also think this government, and this started with David Cameron, his lieutenant over there, obviously, has been dangerously naive about Russia and about China, and it is now dangerously naive about Trump. Maybe we would be able to do a trade deal with America. I don't want the trade deal that Donald Trump would want to do with the United Kingdom. I really don't. And when it comes to Russia, I think the chickens have come home to roost in recent months. I've been arguing for a very long time that when David Cameron came to government, he said, oh, let's just do more trade with Russia, and that'll be easy. You cannot have a foreign policy which is only based on trade. You have to bring the issues of corruption, of espionage, of malign influence around the world to bear on your foreign policy as well. And of course, now I think we've left ourselves open, in particular in the City of London, to vast amounts of dodgy Russian money coming into the UK, buying up football clubs, buying up all the large property holdings in London so as to get money out of Russia. So I think they've been dangerously naive. And incidentally, when Theresa May recently went to China, where there are 1 million Uyghurs, who are an ethnic group, Muslims, in concentration camps, she didn't say a single word about that. I think that is a dereliction of duty. That's not the kind of Britain, that's not the kind of leadership that I think Britain should be giving. I have been slightly unfair to the government. The government has got one other policy, which is austerity. It's a means, supposedly, of dealing with our financial situation. And it is true that 10 years ago we had a terrible financial crash. It wasn't entirely created. It wasn't entirely. Gordon Brown was Prime Minister at the time. It wasn't. I was in the government. Yes. It was not. Yes, and at the time, David Cameron and George Osborne wholeheartedly supported Labour's spending plans. The crash was not created by Labour spending money on the NHS. Quite the reverse, because I think what we should have been doing since the crash is investing in our infrastructure in this country, investing in skills so that we have a decent, prosperous future ahead of us, rather than endlessly making local government predominantly cut budgets here, there, and that's the libraries going, that's schools not having enough books, it's the NHS still being hideously underfunded, meaning that we've got longer waiting lists in accident and emergency, and failing to meet all our targets. But the worst of all of this is that now the majority of people in my constituency who rely on food banks are people in work. The majority of people living in poverty today are people who are in work. And I think that that is morally offensive. If you work, you should surely to God have enough money to put the food on the table at the end of the week for your kids. And that's not the country we live in. We've seen a rapid increase in the number of people relying on food banks. And isn't it an irony that the food bank in the Rhondda is in the building that used to be the Conservative Association? I also have other problems with the government. I think it's too autocratic. It's determined to hold on to power for the sake of power itself. It's used every trick in the book in Parliament to prevent proper debate. But in the end, I just don't believe that Theresa May has confidence in herself. You know, there was that extraordinary moment when she was holding hands with Donald Trump, which was quite strange. And Donald Trump said, I believe that I can tell we're going to get on really well because I'm a people person and I can tell that Theresa May is a people person. And I was thinking, all right, you have just proved that you're not a people person, because if there's one thing Theresa May is not, she is not a people person. And actually what we want at a moment like this in a government is not partisan politics. This is like the 1930s, this moment of national crisis. I believe that what she should be thinking of is not how can I keep the Tory party together, how can I make sure that these three still stop putting in their letters. What she should be thinking about is how can I lead this country as the Prime Minister of the country and not just leader of the Conservative Party, because that is what a true government should do. My two final points. Peter Bone's about to get up. Peter is a really lovely chap.
Things like that.
He's very kind, but quite right.
In fact, he's a much nicer person than his politics. And I look forward to hearing what he's going to say. But just don't be beguiled. Do not be beguiled. And finally, I'd say to Desmond, yes, no is a big word. Quite happy to concede that. But it's nowhere near big enough for what we need today. What about diddly squat confidence in Her Majesty's government? What about sweet Fanny Adams' confidence in Her Majesty's government? What about absolutely no confidence whatsoever in Her Majesty's rotten, corrupt, dodgy, incompetent government?
Thank you very much, Chris. We pass on now, as Chris said, to Peter Bone. Peter Bone is a prominent campaigner for Brexit and is one of the backbench Conservative MPs behind the pressure group Leave Means Leave. He has represented Wellingborough since 2005, becoming known for his distinctive style of questioning at Prime Minister's questions. Peter, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be back here tonight. In the House of Commons, you have to start when someone makes a speech by saying something nice about the previous speaker. And actually, find something he actually said that you agree with. So actually, that's not a problem for me, because Chris Bryant is a leading parliamentarian. He sits on the back benches of the Labour Party, not because he's not good enough to be on the front bench, but the front bench isn't good enough to have him. And he... And he speaks with great passion about Russia. And he spoke about Russia long before it was politically the thing to do, and he should be congratulated. Unfortunately, tonight, he went off piece, and the closing remarks, if you analyse them, were absurd. To say that the government is corrupt is completely wrong. There's not one suggestion of corruption. And if it had been in the House of Mr. President, if this had been the House of Commons, you'd have made him sit down and apologise, and if he hadn't apologised, he'd been thrown out. I do not think you can say the House of Commons is corrupt. But, ladies and gentlemen, the other thing, because this is a team game tonight, and we have the other speakers are eminently brilliant. Sir Ed Davey, who has been in government, a cabinet minister, in the Cameron government. What an honour that must have been, sir. I, of course, obviously turned down any opportunities to be in that government, which, of course, there were none. So I spent my whole time campaigning to get rid of his department, the Department of Energy and Climate Change, and I had a private member's bill. And thankfully, I think after you went, sir, that department was quite correctly abolished. The one thing they say about me is which side am I on tonight? I'm supporting the government tonight, aren't I? Yes, yes. When I got the invitation, I wasn't quite sure which side of the chamber I was supposed to be on. But when he talks as though he's a fierce opposition of Tory policies. He served, for goodness knows how long, with David Cameron. I voted more times against David Cameron's government than he did. In fact, I was more often not in the lobby with him.
We don't talk about that in public.
Thank you. And I'm pleased to say that the Liberal Democrats quite rightly have reaped the reward of being in government. There are none. Are there any in the House of Commons left? Oh, sorry. You know what? You look across on the opposition benches and they're never there. Now we turn to Alex. Now, Alex, I met only tonight, and she's, I don't want to ruin her career before it starts, but I think she's going to be very good. She impressed me enormously. And though if she wants to be in the House of Commons, no doubt she will. The first thing she did was give a high five to my youngest son, Thomas, who is... and he is sitting here tonight. He's taller than me. He is a loyal family member. He's listened to me for 17 years, so he's now a fully paid up member of the Labour Party. But Alex, I wish you well in your career in the future. But I'm sort of the middle of this sandwich because I've got two esteemed colleagues with me. Sir Desmond, who you've already heard from, is brilliant. When he was PPS to David Cameron, he used to absolutely terrify me. And Conor Burns, who, when you listen to him, you will realize he is unbelievably sincere, a great intellect, and he will speak with great passion. So why aren't these two in government? They deserve to be in government. The reason they aren't in government is because we've got a government that doesn't believe in Brexit, and all three of us are passionate about Brexit. So when I considered this motion, I thought I could start by saying the obvious things, that, you know, the Conservative government has got the lowest unemployment for more than 40 years, more young people in work than ever before, the deficit is down, the ratio of debt to GDP is down, the house prices are up, interest rates are low, the stock market is high, and manufacturing industry is growing. Now, all those things are obviously true. And it's also true, of course, and even if they weren't, they sounded good. The truth of the moment, and I'm afraid this audience, this is one of the problems we have with this audience, is you're young. And what happens? And let me explain what is nothing wrong with being young, but you don't remember. And history tells you what happens. You get a Conservative government, they build the economy up, everything goes well. And then there's somebody from the Labour side who says, I'm going to give you free everything. And they have a money tree, and you know what? The British people are fooled. And we have a Labour government, and of course they trash the economy. And every single Labour government has left unemployment higher than when they came into office. And then what happens is we have a Conservative government that rebuilds things, and we get better and better and better. And I'm afraid we're in danger of being that point in the cycle at the moment. And the only thing that, of course, possibly saving us is Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, in a normal side, we've not even got a majority. I mean, we went into the last general election standing with Theresa. We had a 21-point lead. And we decided it would be wrong if we got back with such a huge majority that there's not proper democratic accountability. So we published our manifesto. And the problem there was somebody read it. Of course, as MPs, they say you stand on a manifesto. We have no idea what's in the manifesto. I still haven't read it. But it didn't. But it had a little bit more of an influence than we thought. So instead of coming back with a reasonable majority, we're actually a minority government. And the reason we can't do any of the big things that we would like to do is, of course, we can't get them through the House of Commons because his mob and his mob will vote against them. But that's not the reason why we should actually vote against this motion. I mean, Desmond made a very good, almost lawyer-like point that no, you could only vote against this if there's nothing the government has done right. Well, of course it has, and I've listed them. But the issue is Brexit. And that's why you have to have confidence in Theresa May and his government, her government. Now, hang on a minute. I've just promised to build a statue to Theresa May in Wellingborough if she does a good Brexit. But the one thing that I think it was Chris or Ed said, well, she doesn't believe in Brexit. She doesn't. The Foreign Secretary doesn't. The Chancellor doesn't. The vast majority of ministers don't. Most Conservative MPs don't. The civil servants don't. Her Chief of Staff definitely doesn't. The media, large sections of the media don't. The establishment don't. Big business doesn't. Oh, go on. Neither do we. There we are. And you know, lots of people in here don't. So what is Theresa May doing? She's negotiating a Brexit deal that she doesn't believe in. She's doing it out of duty because we delegated the decision to the British people and the British people voted for Brexit. Now, there can be nothing more courageous than all these top government ministers working together to deliver something that they don't actually believe in. Now, you have to say, you have to have confidence in that sort of courage. And while it's a very fair argument to argue that Jeremy Corbyn will trash the country and all that, well, we know that will happen. But, you know, if I ask Chris now, well, he won't say this, but many in his party would say, for goodness sake, don't risk a general election because we don't want Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. Is that right, Chris? No. You want Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister? I don't want a general election. Well, no, you don't. No. Hey, there we are. A leading member of Her Majesty's opposition does not want a general election. Actually, that's my time up, but go on. But that's a very good point, except it's totally, totally wrong. The point is, we are the ones that build the economy. Did you not listen to what I said? And if you want to see the economy trashed, they will do that if they get back into power, and that's quite a possibility. And then when you get a bit older, you'll all vote for the Conservatives to restore sanity to the economy of this country. For goodness sake, this motion is absurd, and you have to vote against it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bone. We pass now on to another round of floor speeches. Try and keep these to a minute so we can keep it nice and brisk. So if you want to speak in proposition of the motion, please keep it up your hand. Down there.
Hi, Cecily, King's College. So Brexit has rightly overshadowed this debate so far, but we can't forget the impact of conservative domestic policies that have been in place since 2010 and are going unchallenged simply because the list of conservative failures so far is so monumentally long. What I want to refer to specifically is the benefit cuts to benefits for poor and disabled people. Now, the UN has called these benefit cuts grave and systematic violations of the rights of disabled people. Now, this sounds clinical, doesn't it? What it means in real life is thousands of disabled people who have died because they simply could not afford to live. What this means is suicide notes from people citing these benefit cuts because they cannot afford to provide for themselves. Now, I know it's fun to stand in the chamber and trade jokes about Brexit, but what we shouldn't forget is that politics is people's lives. These are people whose decisions and whose outcomes in life are affected by these policies. These are people who are living and dying, and we shouldn't forget that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecily. Does anyone want to speak in opposition of the motion? Over there.
Owen, I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate here because I'm Irish, and this is just a point in favour of the opposition of this motion, and a point of rebuttal slightly against the gentleman over there, but I do agree with a lot of what he was saying. When we look at the option that Theresa May was given by Leave Varadkar and the EU, I don't think she was given a very good option. I think that when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and I was very young when it was signed, so I obviously remember very little, I don't remember the EU really being a member or someone involved in that discussion. However, I would like to know, and I would like to supine, what would Labour's solution, or what would Labour's, apart from the obvious sensible solution of staying within the EU, what other alternative solution would they have offered? Because when the debate around Brexit was happening before the vote, I don't remember much debate and much discussion about what would happen with the border until eventually we came to the point where Theresa May was given this horrible decision to have to make, which now is clearly a shambles. But I don't think the Labour government will or would have done anything better.
And does anyone want to speak in abstention of the motion? I know there were quite a few of you last time. I'm going to go in the row there, yeah, in the grey top. Yeah, just wait for the microphone to come round to you. Yeah, perfect.
Hi, Radka Palova from John's. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with our politics. If I look at the article from BBC and say, wait a minute, is this the BBC or the Onion? You know, there is something fundamentally wrong. If we, you know, watch Theresa May dance and sing like I'm dancing queen, while millions of European citizens here in the UK are worried what's going to happen to them, if they are going to be able to stay after Brexit happens. And it's fundamentally wrong when we are talking about Irish people at the border. I think it's absolutely grotesque when we are listening to comparisons to the EU, to Soviet Union, where as far as I know, the European Union hasn't built any gulags or has not invaded my country. So the comparison here is quite, you know, in line of the tradition of Bulgakov's satire. The only one missing here is a dancing cat, and we are all set to go, you know. So if we are having these discussions, there is something wrong, and I wanted to point out that.
Thank you so much for those contributions from the floor. We're going to go back now to our final pair of speakers. Alex Murray is going to be our final speaker on side proposition. Alex is a second-year HSPS student at King's College and the Women's Officer Designate at the Union. Alex has won this slot through an open audition, which is a newish initiative we're trying this year. So look out for opportunities to do this in the future. Alex, the floor is yours.
I can time myself, right? I'm going to be honest here. I was planning on starting this speech by responding to some of the points we would have heard from side opposition. But to be honest, I'm not really sure what we have heard from side opposition. They've made it quite clear, one by one, that each of them would secretly rather be speaking for our side, which, to be honest, I can sympathize with them on. And so instead, they seem to be using their time to read from children's books and tell us who's speaking, which is admittedly very kind, but it's also written on the pieces of paper that were handed out earlier. But to the best of my ability, I am going to respond to what I think we can take out of the two speeches we've heard. So first of all, we hear that no is a very big word. I hope that the second speaker from my side has already convinced you of why that isn't enough of an argument, and why, in fact, no is a very big word, but it's a word we're happy using for very big issues like Brexit and politics. But the second argument that I seem to be able to get out of their side is that, yeah, Theresa May is pretty awful, and the government is pretty awful, and we're all a little bit doomed, but hey, Corbyn's bad too. And first of all, that's just not the debate. Like, how much confidence you do or don't have in somebody is not related to how much confidence you have in anybody else. But secondly, let's address this. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that this was relevant, and let's talk about how we might respond to this. So from the first speaker, we hear that Corbyn isn't civilized, and Corbynites aren't civilized, and that's not good. Well, frankly, I think Corbyn is civilized. Well, the anti-Semitism is an issue, but okay, moving on past that, because that's also not what this debate is about. I think Corbyn is perfectly civilized, but what we've seen under the Tory government for the last 7 years has been a series of austerity cuts that have left people very, very much in poverty, and like we heard from the floor speech, it has led to deaths. So if that is the picture of civilization that the opposition platform has presented to you, then I'm not that fussed if the alternative Labour government would not meet that bar of civilization. So secondly, we hear from the second speaker of the opposition that Labour and the left wing are always bad at economics. Well, that's up for debate, clearly, that's why we're here. But I think that, again, we have to look at the human consequences of this argument that you're trying to make in purely theoretical terms. So again, we look at things that have cropped up again and again throughout this debate. So we look at austerity, and we look at food banks, and we look at cuts, and we look at poverty, and we look at the reality of life under a conservative government, and I think that that is a very high human cost to pay, and that I care a little bit less about things like the inflation rate when compared to that massive human cost. So the summary of all that I've told you so far is basically, no thank you. Yes, I'm fine with the Labour government. Yes, I'm probably fine with the Corbyn government. And anyway, that's not the debate. So I'm going to be bringing up two main points today that I hope haven't been addressed by the speakers so far. Firstly, I'm going to talk about some of the consequences of the Brexit instability that they've talked to you about. And secondly, I'm going to talk about how the very foundation of the government is something that I am unable to have confidence in because it was formed backed by votes from the DUP, and I'm going to explain to you why I think that is such a big issue. But firstly, let's talk about some of the issues that have arisen from the Brexit instability that my partners have already told you about. So, I think that the last 2 years since we had the Brexit vote, We've seen time and time again patterns of neglect from the government. And this is sort of understandable, because Bojo's been in cabinet, and I understand that that's quite a big and difficult thing to deal with, and I'm sure that they've all been very preoccupied with the sorts of issues and the sorts of squabbling that you've already been told about by my teammates. But that does matter, because it means that they haven't been addressing other things that we really need a government to be addressing. For example, we see that a large majority of the people whose houses were lost in the Grenfell fire still haven't been rehomed. That matters, and the government should have fixed that. We also see the recent Windrush scandal, which my partner's already touched on. We see that thousands of people who are UK citizens have not been able to get a driving license. They've not been able to access health services, and they've not been able to get a job. Again, that matters. At the point where somebody is not able, where so many people are not able to access those ranges of services that should be guaranteed to them by the government, I say to you that government has failed, and I say to you that I have no confidence in that government. We also see that Brexit itself has created many issues of neglect which the country is currently facing. For example, lots of people don't have confidence in the government's ability to supply them with food after the March deadline, after which we may or may not be in the EU, and if we are in the EU, we're not sure exactly what that will look like. So people have been stockpiling food. But people have been stockpiling more than food. We also see that many, many diabetics in this country have been stockpiling insulin because they don't have faith in the government's ability to supply them with that medicine which is so necessary for them to survive. Again, I say that at the point where many citizens of the country do not believe that the government is able to keep them alive, I tell you that that government has failed. But moving on to my second point, which is about the DUP. So many of you probably know this, but to recap, in 2017, Theresa May hoped she would get a really big majority in Parliament, but she didn't. And so what she did was she formed a minority government propped up by 10 votes from the DUP. The Democratic Unionist Party are a party in Northern Ireland. They are very strongly conservative. This is an issue for many reasons. Firstly, it poses a threat to peace in Northern Ireland. And this isn't a trite issue. It is only in the 1990s that thousands of lives were lost in Ireland and throughout the United Kingdom from deaths resulted to terrorism. That's why John Major, who was Prime Minister at that time, has said that he's extremely worried by Theresa May's decision to strike this minority government agreement. And that's why he said that he doesn't have faith in it and that he thinks it was an irresponsible decision. Because of the delicate nature of peace in Northern Ireland, they need an arbiter when the two sides of this argument can't agree, which happens quite a lot. Now, traditionally, that neutral referee has been the United Kingdom and our Prime Minister. After all, it was our Prime Minister who initially set up the power-sharing agreement. But when the Prime Minister is writing $1 billion checks to one of the parties on one side of that disagreement, and when that same party has the ability, to decide whether or not Theresa May and her party stay in power, there cannot be faith in her ability to act as this neutral referee. And this means that there is now nobody able to intervene and to resolve these issues in Northern Ireland. And this matters now more than ever because for 500 days, there's been no government in Northern Ireland since the power sharing agreement fell apart. Northern Ireland is also part of the UK. Northern Ireland is also part of the UK. Theresa May and her government also have a responsibility to represent these citizens. But by forming this agreement, she's abandoned the citizens of Northern Ireland. She's also failing to represent them, in government. Because the DUP have certain interests, for example, they're homophobic and misogynist, you know how it goes, because they have these certain interests, they have certain interests in what happens in Northern Ireland. So, for example, they don't want people in that country to be able to access same-sex marriage, and they don't want them to be able to access abortions. Both things, I might add, that you're now able to access if you live in the Republic of Ireland, which is actually a more conservative country. The people of the Republic of Ireland haven't been consulted. They haven't been offered the Northern Ireland haven't been consulted. They haven't been offered referendums about whether they would like, for example, same-sex marriage. instead, Theresa May isn't able to offer them that. She isn't able to offer them any compromises at all because the DUP just have to shake their finger and she's like, oh, well, okay, guess it sucks to live in Northern Ireland. But it also sucks to live in the UK under this government because Theresa May is also failing to represent them. I don't have time to go into it in much detail, but in 2015, she promised the transgender people in the UK reforms that would massively increase their quality of life by cutting down the number of medicalized bureaucratic steps they have to go through in order to legally change their gender. But since 2017, and since she struck this deal with the DUP, she's failed to represent them because she's completely ignored that promise she made, and she hasn't mentioned it since. This means that there are issues with the quality of life for many people in the UK, because instead of being governed by Parliament or by Cabinet, which is supposed to represent their interests, instead they're being governed by just 10 politicians from Northern Ireland. There's no way that's fair. What Theresa May promised us over and over again was a strong and stable government. But what she's given us is anything but. It's a weak government propped up by the Northern Irish. It's a government that is failing to meet the basic needs of its people. And for that reason, I beg you to propose.
Thank you so much for that speech, Alex. To close the debate, we have Conor Burns MP. Conor Burns was Boris Johnson's private parliamentary secretary and resigned in solidarity with him over the controversial Chequers deal. Conor, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as Peter said, it is customary to begin by saying kind things about those who have spoken before. And it is my pleasure to say to Alex that the compliment I would pay you today is that I am relieved that I am speaking after you and not before you. I would, however, just gently take issue with one accusation you levelled against Her Majesty's government under the leadership of the Conservative Party, and that is that we were homophobic in some way. There's a bit of an outbreak of gayness today because I'm the other gay speaker, and I have to say that I'm very proud that to have been a supporter and a member of a government that introduced that historic legislation to pass the Same-Sex Marriage Act in the United Kingdom. Peter was very generous in saying that Desmond and I, in Desmond's case, resuming a ministerial career, and that I should have a ministerial career, and Peter wondered why it hadn't happened. And I thought I'd like to share with you a quick story about why I believe it didn't happen under David Cameron. And I had the great privilege in the later years of Lady Thatcher's life of getting to know her incredibly well. I used to go and visit her at her home every Sunday evening. And one Sunday evening, I took a taxi to see her. I normally walked, but I took a taxi on this occasion because it was a very wet and miserable evening. And I asked the taxi driver to take me to Chester Square. And he said, "Which end of the square do you want, Gov?" I said, "The house with the policeman outside." "Oh," he said, "Maggie Thatcher's, Gov." I said, "That's right." He said, "What are you going there for then?" I said, "I'm going to have a drink with her." "How do you know her then?" And I said, "Well, she's a friend of mine." "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a Tory MP. And when we arrived, the fare was about £9. I went to pay the fare. He refused to take the fare. And he said, "Your fare tonight, Gov, is you go in there and you tell her from me, we ain't had a good one since." Well, my friends, I went in and I told Margaret this, and she looked at me and said, "Well, he's quite right." And I told this story when the House of Commons gathered to pay tribute to Margaret Thatcher when she died, with Prime Minister Cameron sitting on the front bench. I have to say, he laughed, but in a funny way. The call never came. It didn't improve much under Theresa, and as the President said, I resigned alongside my former boss, Boris Johnson, to try and persuade the Prime Minister to chuck Chequers. So I'm still not sort of waiting in expectation for that call to ministerial office. I'd like to respond, if I may, to a few of the points that were made, both from other speakers and from members of the audience. I'd like to say to the lady in the gallery who's texting with some vigor, what have we ever done? What have we politicians ever done for you? Well, do you know, I remember when I was at university, and coming back to universities, you always think about your own time. When I went to university, it was 1 in 7 of school leavers who made it to university. It's now almost 1 in 2, and that's both the Labour government and it's expanded under the Conservative government have done that for your generation. And I'm very proud of that huge expansion and opportunity that we have presided over, including amongst the poorest and most deprived in community. And by the way, when I accepted the invitation to come here today, I was told the principal speaker for the opposition was going to be Emily Thornberry, who had in fact accepted. Unfortunately, it didn't make it into her diary. I'm sure that's not her fault, and she'll be a fantastic Foreign Secretary. To my friend here from Ireland, I agreed very much with the points you made, and to Mr. Robinson somewhere over there. You posed the question, has anyone here ever lived in Northern Ireland? Well, I was born in Northern Ireland. I was born in Belfast. I'm a Catholic and I'm a Unionist. I feel and understand both traditions in Northern Ireland. But I really do think that to say that the situation we find ourselves in will somehow lead to a return to the campaign of terror by Sinn Féin IRA is something of an exaggeration, particularly given that Sinn Féin are entirely signed up to the treaties that were entered into. And as for the border, look, there's already a border here. There's a lot of exaggerated nonsense talked about the Northern Irish situation. There are already 2 police forces, 2 tax agencies, different rates of taxation each side of the border. There is smuggling of agri-diesel and cigarettes, and these are already enforced. And crucially, they're enforced away from the border. And it cannot be beyond the wit of man for us to come up with a solution to that. And by the way, we were working on that solution under the government of Enda Kenny before he left office, and then Mr. Varadkar and Mr. Coveney, who were struggling with their own weak coalition, found that the Sinn Féin popularity was on the rise in the Irish Republic, and guess what? Attacking the British in the Republic of Ireland is actually domestically quite popular. And as to the point that Alex made about the extra spending in Northern Ireland, by the way, I'm one of those politicians who calls spending spending, not all spending investment. The extra spending that we committed to in Northern Ireland is for things like roads and infrastructure. And I know Northern Ireland is still a very divided society, but we still don't have Catholic roads and Protestant roads. If you build a road on Northern Ireland, it will benefit the entire community in Northern Ireland. Now, Chris Bryant, I've always been fond of Chris, Chris told us he had a dream. Now, it wasn't exactly on Martin Luther King's scale that he had a dream, but what he didn't tell you about is his own nightmare. And this is a bizarre situation that we're in domestic politics today, that for a large section of the parliamentary Labour Party, the leader of the Labour Party becoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is something they regard as a nightmare. And that's why you will get the dodging of the question about whether they want their own leader to become Prime Minister. I may have difference of opinion with my Prime Minister leader on some things, but I'm very pleased that Theresa May is Prime Minister. Now, I enjoyed Ed Davey's contribution. He has no confidence in the government. And then he came to those critical little 5 words. When I was in the government. Now, this government has been in power for 10 years. And for 5 of those 10 years, it was a coalition. Sorry, 8. Okay, so that's even worse, actually, isn't it? It's even worse, Chris, because that means that for the more than half of the duration of this government, our friend here was a minister. So presumably, you only have no confidence in the bit that you weren't involved in, which seems a bit strange. I'm very happy to give way. Very happy to give way.
I'm rather surprised because Conor is a very distinguished parliamentarian, but he clearly missed that there was an election.
I remember the election only too well, and many of us regret there was an election. But, you know, one of our proud records is creating employment, and you got your job back in that election, so that's another success for the government, which I am proud to support. And then we had the predictable, and I have to say, rather enjoyable comments about my boss, who I was with earlier today, about his record as Foreign Secretary. I actually think that Boris Johnson has a very proud record as Foreign Secretary. He reached out and visited countries that have been ignored for decades. One of the last ones he visited before he resigned was Peru, where we are the largest single investor into Peru. He did massive amounts of work on international marine conservation, on the elimination of the illegal wildlife trade, and of the promotion of international education of women and girls. Now look, let's turn really to the substance of this debate, because this is a debate about whether this House and ultimately this country has confidence in this government today. Remember back to the time when this government came to power. In the aftermath of the financial crisis, albeit an international financial crisis, but which we were uniquely unprepared for in the United Kingdom. Potential for financial institutions to collapse. That was the context in which David Cameron made that bold and generous offer to the Liberal Democrats, because Britain needed a stable government with a good majority to take the difficult but very necessary steps we needed to take. And since this government has been in, we've had the most incredible expansion of apprenticeships. We have had the expansion of the academy school program. We've had the introduction of free schools, a rising in the standards of education in our country, record investment in the National Health Service, the launch of the modern industrial strategy. We've passed into law the first modern slavery bill. We've lifted millions of people out of income tax by raising the personal allowance from $6,475 to 11,500. Sit down, sir, just one moment. 11,500. 5.2 million people who were previous payers of income tax now lifted out of income tax altogether. And the top 2.5% of earners in the United Kingdom now pay over 40.5% of all income tax. And that is up from 33.6% under Labour, the party of equality and opportunity, we are told. The economy today is 16.1% bigger than it was in 2010. Unemployment has fallen from 8% to 4% today. There are 3.2 million new jobs that have been created since we came to office. There are 10,200 new teachers, 14,358 more doctors than in 2010. And by reducing the rate of corporation tax from 28% to 20%, we have seen corporation tax receipts rise from 36 billion in 2009-10 to over 57 billion last year. That's more money from business going in to fund our great public services. And I want to end with this, because the big challenge that we took on as government was the state of our national finances. And we have reduced the deficit. And I pay credit to our Liberal Democrat coalition partners in making those tough decisions to get that deficit coming down. But in the last financial year, and I say this particularly to your generation, the call on the public purse of interest on that national debt, not repayment of the debt, interest in servicing it alone, was £41.2 billion. That's more than we spend in totality on schools in the United Kingdom. This is a government that is not afraid to take the difficult decisions for the future, to make sure that we pass on to you the ultimate task of government, of politicians, to pass on to you a better situation than the one we inherited. We have been prepared to take those decisions. We have enjoyed some success, but there is so much still more to do. My friends, it is because we in government have never flinched from taking those tough decisions that this House and this country can have confidence in this government today.
Thank you, Connor. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thanks to our stewards, for Emily and Daniel up there doing the AV. If you're interested in getting involved, you get a free toasted sandwich, I believe, and £5 bar tab, so do get involved. Thank you also to Alex for our first auditionee. Did a really good job. So thank you for doing that. That's really great. And that's a way in which you can all get involved. So I think we're holding auditions for that for our spaces in next week's debate, which is on Oxbridge at some point in the week, and you'll be advertising that. And that's your chance to speak in the chamber tomorrow. I've been told it's tomorrow. So there's a form which we've shared on our Facebook channel, so get onto that. Really good opportunity to speak alongside some really exciting people. And also you get a free-course dinner, so what's not to like? In terms of good debates to come, next Tuesday we've got the varsity debate against Oxford, which is exciting. On Saturday, we have Adam Driver coming to speak. That's members only. Information about that is going to be circulated tomorrow, so watch out for that, because that will explain exactly how that event is going to work. Midnight tonight is the deadline to sign up for membership to be entered into the ballot for the Freshers' Ball, so keep that on the horizon there. If you've got any questions about that or about anything we do at the union, I'll be around in the foyer outside, as will lots of members of committee, anyone in high vis. Go and find them and have a chat. Announcements done. In terms of what happens from here, at the union, we vote with our feet. So as you'll be able to see, both upstairs and downstairs, there are doors. So downstairs, you have the no door on my left, the I door on my right, and abstentions through the middle. The votes will be counted, and the result will be announced in the bar afterwards. Do hang around for a drink with some of the speakers. Thank you once again to all our speakers. Thanks to you guys. You're great.